She arrived without a sound. No music, no announcement, no entourage dressed to impress. Only 3 women in charcoal suits, walking in measured steps behind her, carrying identical leather folders, like nurses walking behind a surgeon into an operating theater, where the patient had not yet realized the surgery had already begun. The venue was the Orchid Ballroom on Victoria Island, Lagos. 240 guests, crystal chandeliers the size of small cars, waiters in white gloves moving between tables like ghosts trained to disappear. And at the center of it all, on a small stage draped in ivory, stood David Adesanya, the groom-to-be, smiling the way men smile when they believe history has already been written in their favor and they are the heroes of it. He was 34 years old that evening, the most celebrated tech investor of his generation in West Africa. Founder of Adesanya Capital, the youngest portfolio manager ever to be listed on the Nigerian stock exchange. He wore a navy Tom Ford tuxedo, his shoes custom-made in Milan, and on his left wrist sat a Patek Philippe tourbillon his fiancée had gifted him the week before. His fiancée was Amara Okeke, only daughter of Chief Obina Okeke, founder of Okeke Holdings, one of the largest privately held conglomerates in sub-Saharan Africa. She was beautiful, yes, educated at Wharton and Harvard Business School, the kind of woman whose name appeared in Forbes Africa Under 30, not because she had done anything remarkable, yet, but because of the size of the trust fund waiting for her. It was, by every visible measure, a perfect evening. And that was the night David Adesanya did the thing he had been planning for 3 months. He invited his ex-wife. Not quietly, not through a friend. He personally placed a hand-delivered gold-embossed invitation in the mailbox of the woman he had divorced 7 years earlier, with a handwritten note at the bottom of the card, almost illegible in its casual cruelty. Chidi, I'd love for you to come. I want you to see how far we've come. David. He said it out loud to his best friend Tunde the night he signed the invitations, with that half-smirk men wear when they believe they have escaped a chapter of their life that almost destroyed them. She needs to see. She called herself a fashion designer. I need her to see what real success looks like. Tunde had laughed. Their circle had laughed. Because that is what men do in Lagos when they believe a woman they discarded is no longer a threat. They applaud themselves for moving on. And so the invitation was sent. And the woman who received it, Chidinma Adesanya, née Okonkwo, the woman they had spent the last 7 years calling the Tailor, the woman David had once walked out on wearing nothing but a wrapper and his pride, sat quietly in her apartment in Ikoyi that week and read the invitation twice. Then she called her lawyer. And then she called her senior counsel. And then she made one additional phone call, a number saved in her phone under no name, a number that belonged to a senior editor at Forbes Africa. She did not say what she would do. She did not need to. Because by then, the woman they had been laughing at was no longer the woman they had divorced. She was the woman they had unknowingly built themselves against, and she was about to remind them, very gently, that the loudest revenge rarely needs a voice. 7 years earlier, she had been a different person. Chidinma Okonkwo grew up in a one-bedroom flat in Surulere, the daughter of a widow who dyed fabric for a living. Her mother ran a small batik workshop behind their home, where she turned imported Dutch wax into garments sold at Yaba Market for marginal profit. It was not glamorous, it was not prestigious, but it kept them alive, and it kept Chidi close to a craft she would later inherit not just as a skill, but as a weapon. She met David Adesanya in her final year at the University of Lagos. He was studying economics, she was studying fashion design. He lived in a 2-bedroom flat in Lekki, paid for by his mother's pension. She lived in a shared room in Yaba, paid for by her mother's dye sales. They fell in love the way young people fall in love, when they do not yet understand that love, unaided by access, often confuses itself with permanence. He proposed in her third year of working at a tailoring house in Allen Avenue. She said yes. Her mother wept. His mother approved, with one quiet warning she would repeat at every family gathering until it became a prayer. Be careful, my son. A woman who knows how to build with her hands will one day build something you cannot take from her. He didn't listen. The marriage lasted 3 years. The first year was hopeful. They rented a small flat in Magodo. She worked at a textile house in Ikeja during the day and designed her own pieces at night. He worked at a junior analyst role at a small investment firm in Victoria Island, coming home smelling of cigar smoke and cheap coffee, telling her about boardroom conversations she pretended to understand. The second year was harder. David began to rise. A promotion. His name started appearing in trade publications. He was invited to dinners with men who spoke about money the way other men spoke about football. He began to dress differently. He began to walk differently. He began to look at Chidi differently. Not badly at first, just differently. The way a man looks at an old photograph when he is no longer the same person in it. And then came Amara Okiki. She was at an industry gala in Banana Island. She wore a dress that cost more than Chidi's entire wardrobe. She spoke about art collections and private equity trusts in a voice that habituated itself to being heard by men who wrote checks. And she looked at David Adesanya, the young, rising analyst from a modest family, as though she were already mentally selecting the engagement ring he had not yet been able to afford. By the third year, the marriage was already a ghost. David stopped coming home on weekends. He stopped asking about her work. He stopped touching her hand in public. And one evening, in the same flat in Magodo where she had once welcomed him home with pepper soup and laughter, David Adesanya sat down at the kitchen table and told Chidinma Okonkwo that he wanted a divorce. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. You know I love you, Chidi, but this marriage is not going to take me where I want to go. I'm sorry. He walked out that night carrying one suitcase. He returned 3 days later with lawyers. And in a small mediation room in Ikeja, with no cameras, no witnesses, and no ceremony, Chidinma signed the divorce papers without reading them twice. She received, as her settlement, the contents of their joint savings account, which amounted to 750,000 naira, and the small tailoring machine she had brought into the marriage. She walked out of the room. She did not cry in front of him. She did not cry in front of his lawyers. She cried in the back seat of a taxi heading to her mother's flat in Surulere, holding the tailoring machine against her chest like a baby that did not yet know what it would grow up to become. What happened next was not revenge. What happened next was work. Chidinma moved back in with her mother that same week. She set up her sewing machine on the small wooden table that had once served as a dining space. She worked 16 hours a day. She dyed fabric at night using the same indigo recipe her grandmother had taught her mother, a recipe that had been passed down through 6 generations and that she had recently begun to formalize into a method with specific temperature gradients, mineral ratios, and color fastness standards. In her first month, she sold 12 dresses at Yaba Market. In her third month, she opened a small shop in Lekki Phase 1, a rented space of barely 40 square meters, sandwiched between a phone repair vendor and a small pharmacy. She called it Ade Okafor. The name combined her mother's maiden name and her grandmother's first name. 2 women, both widows, both never given credit for the empire they had quietly built through cloth. By the end of her first year, she had outgrown the shop. By the end of her second year, she had opened a flagship atelier in Ikoyi, on a street where only foreign embassies and the houses of old money Lagosians once lived. By the end of her third year, Ade Okafor Couture had been featured in Vogue Africa, Elle Afrique, and a BBC Africa documentary on emerging African fashion houses. By the end of her 5th year, she had boutiques in Accra, Nairobi, Cape Town, London, and Paris. By the end of her 6th year, she had patented her grandmother's indigo dye method under the name Trademark Okonkwo 6. The patent was registered in 17 countries. It became one of the most cited natural dye patents in African fashion history. By the end of her 7th year, the year of David's engagement party, Chidinma Chidi Okonkwo was 32 years old, divorced, with no children, and the founder, CEO, and sole proprietor of a fashion empire valued by a private equity valuation conducted that January at $412 million. She owned a duplex penthouse in Ikoyi. She owned a townhouse in Mayfair. She owned an atelier in the 8th arrondissement of Paris. She had a staff of 370. She had 211 wholesale clients across Europe, Asia, and the Americas. She had been nominated twice for the LVMH Prize for Emerging African Fashion Talent. And David Adesanya, the man who had divorced her because he said she was not going to take him where he wanted to go, did not know a single one of these facts. Because Chidi had never been loud. She had never been on the cover of any magazine. She had never been interviewed on any red carpet. She had never once posted about her success on social media. She had simply worked, quietly, patiently, with the patience of a woman who understood that revenge, real revenge, was never about noise. It was about the quiet accumulation of weight until the moment you finally placed it on the scale. The week before the engagement party, Chidi summoned her senior counsel, Bose Bakare, to her Ikoyi penthouse. Bose was 54 years old, one of the sharpest commercial litigation attorneys in Nigeria. She had handled property disputes for 2 former vice presidents, intellectual property cases for 3 publicly listed companies, and had once won a trademark case against a French luxury house that had attempted to appropriate a Yoruba textile pattern. She arrived that evening wearing a tailored black blazer, carrying no notes, because Bose Bakare did not need notes for anything. "Tell me exactly what you want done," she said. Chidi sat across from her, hands folded on her lap, calm. "I want him to understand 3 things, Bose. First, that the woman he threw away was not what he thought she was. Second, that the family he is marrying into is sitting on something that is legally mine. And third, that I do not need to scream any of this to anyone." Bose smiled. "And how do you want it delivered?" Silently. 3 lawyers, 1 folder, and a Forbes Africa journalist who is not going to write about it until after it is over. Bose nodded. "The engagement party is Saturday. I will be there. I will hand-deliver the folder, and I will not raise my voice once." 3 weeks earlier, Bose had quietly begun the 3rd part of her plan. She had written to Chief Obina Okeke's office, formally requesting a meeting regarding an ongoing intellectual property dispute relevant to your textile import license. She had not told Chief Okeke what the dispute was. She had only told him the name of the registered patent at issue. And when Chief Okeke's lawyers replied, asking which patent she was referring to, she had attached a single page. Trademark Okonkwo 6. Chief Okeke's lawyers went silent for 3 days, because Trademark Okonkwo 6 was not just an indigo dye method. It was, in fact, the foundational intellectual property on which Okeke Holdings' entire textile import division was built. In 2009, Chief Okeke had acquired a small Dutch textile manufacturer, Indigo BV, whose entire production line was based on a method that had, for decades, been informally developed by Chidi's grandmother in Surulere and passed verbally to her daughter, who had passed it to Chidi, who had finally formalized, documented, and patented it. The Okeke family had built a $1 billion Naira textile division on a method their lawyers had assumed was untraceable to any living claimant. They had not known that the claimant existed. That claimant was the woman David Adesanya had divorced 7 years earlier for not taking him where he wanted to go. Saturday arrived. The orchid ballroom was arranged in whites, golds, and greens, the colors of the Okeke family crest. 240 guests sat at tables arranged like an opera audience, all facing the small stage at the front. The Lagos elite were out in full force. Senators, bankers, diplomats, a famous Nollywood director, 2 former governors, 1 serving minister, a billionaire cement tycoon, 2 women who had divorced oil magnates and married even richer ones. Everyone who was anyone in Lagos in that season was there. And there, in the 3rd row from the stage, near an empty chair that David had personally reserved for her, sat Chidinma Okonkwo. She had not been announced. She had arrived on foot, 15 minutes after the ceremony had begun, dressed in a simple black dress from her own atelier. No jewelry except a thin gold chain her mother had given her at 16. The 3 lawyers entered behind her, also in black, holding identical slim leather folders. And the Forbes Africa editor, posing as a distant cousin of one of the guests, sat in the last row, pen in hand, eyes fixed on whatever was about to unfold. David saw her from the stage. His smile did not change. It widened. Tunde, she came. Are you surprised? She always was a fool. They laughed. They did not know that the woman they were laughing at had, in the last 7 years, hired 45 lawyers, patented 17 methodologies, opened 71 retail points, signed licensing deals with 3 European fashion houses, and recently initiated the largest quiet intellectual property litigation in the history of Nigerian commercial law. They did not know. Because in the world of men who believe wealth is loud, silence is the most expensive sound in the world, and they had never been trained to hear it. The engagement ceremony reached the moment of toasts. Chief Obinna Okeke rose first. He was 71. Slow on his left knee, but commanding in his voice. He raised his glass and praised his daughter. He praised his own empire. He praised the alliance between Okeke Holdings and Adesanya Capital. He spoke, as Nigerian patriarchs speak, about legacy, about dynasty, about the future. He did not know that the woman sitting near the back of the room had spent the last 6 months building the legal framework to dismantle 11% of his fortune. When he finished, he called David to the stage. David rose, beaming, glass in hand. He made a short speech. He thanked Chief Okeke. He thanked Amara. He thanked God. He did not thank Chidinma. No one expected him to. But just as he raised his glass for the toast, Chidi rose too. She did not stand dramatically. She did not raise her voice. She simply stood. She tapped the shoulder of the woman beside her. She gestured politely toward the aisle, and she began to walk. The 3 lawyers stood at the same moment, like a synchronized formation, holding their folders. They did not speak. They did not announce themselves. They walked 1 step behind Chidi at the same pace, with the same posture, like women who had rehearsed this moment for months. David saw her coming. He saw her face. He saw that there was no anger in it. There was no grief in it. There was no vengeance in it. There was only the calm expression of a woman who had finally arrived at a destination she had been walking toward for 7 years. And somewhere in the back of his mind, before he could form any conscious thought, David Adesanya understood that what was about to happen was not for him. It was for Chief Okeke, but it was going to destroy him anyway. Chidi reached the stage. She did not climb the stairs. She did not reach for the microphone. She did not ask anyone to introduce her. She simply looked at Chief Obinna Okeke, who had been watching her with the curious expression of a man trying to recall where he had seen a face before. Then she extended her hand. Her senior counsel, Bose Bakare, stepped forward, opened the leather folder, and handed Chief Okeke a single document. 12 pages, bound in navy blue. The seal of the Federal High Court of Nigeria embossed on the cover. Mr. Okeke, my client, Mrs. Chidinma Okonkwo, is the lawful and registered owner of trademark Okonkwo 6, registered with the Nigerian Trademarks Registry in 2019, and subsequently registered in 17 international jurisdictions. Your textile import division, specifically Indigo BV, acquired in 2009, operates a production methodology whose foundational intellectual property belongs to my client's family and has been operated commercially without license, consent, or compensation since 2009. My client has filed a quiet claim with the Federal High Court seeking, among other reliefs, full accounting of all profits derived from the unauthorized use of her patented methodology since 2009, plus statutory damages under the Nigerian Patents and Designs Act. The estimated valuation of this claim, based on audited figures from your own 2024 annual report, is $112 million. The ballroom went silent. Not figuratively, literally. The background music, which had been playing softly, seemed to pause, as though even the orchestra understood what had just happened. Chief Obinna Okeke's hand, holding the glass, began to shake. Amara, standing beside David on the stage, turned pale. And David Adesanya, the man who had just toasted his future, suddenly understood, with the clarity of a man who has just been told the building he is standing in is on fire, that this was not a fight between strangers. This was a fight he had started 7 years ago, when he had walked out on a woman whose mother's craft had become the foundation of one of the largest textile empires in West Africa. And he had walked out on her, believing she was small. He had just discovered how catastrophically wrong he had been. Chidi did not stay for the aftermath. She handed the document to Chief Okeke. She looked at David once. It was not a hateful look. It was not a victorious look. It was the look of a woman who had simply completed a task she had set for herself. Then she turned. She walked out the same way she had come in. The 3 lawyers followed. The Forbes editor followed. No one stopped them. No one spoke to them. No one even knew what to say. Because Chidinma Okonkwo had arrived, spoken 4 sentences through her counsel, and left. She had not raised her voice once. She had not needed to. By midnight, Chief Obinna Okeke had left the venue in his private car, refusing to speak to his daughter. By 2 in the morning, his lead corporate lawyer had been summoned from Lagos to Abuja. By dawn the next day, 3 separate external legal teams had been hired to assess the claim. By Monday morning, the Okeke family had quietly retained a crisis communications firm to manage the leak risk to Forbes Africa. By Tuesday, David Adesanya had been asked, formally and in writing, by Amara's father's representatives to step back from the engagement until the legal matter is resolved. By Wednesday, the engagement had been called off. By Friday, Amara's family had filed a countersuit against David personally, alleging that he had misrepresented the nature and extent of prior personal and professional relationships that had directly contributed to the legal exposure now facing the Okeke family's textile division. David lost the engagement. He lost his access to the Okeke investment capital his entire portfolio had been designed around. And within 90 days, the entire Adesanya capital structure began to unravel. Investors withdrew. Boards resigned. The tech press ran quiet stories about internal restructuring. Chidi did not write a single press release. She did not issue a single statement. She did not attend a single interview. She simply returned to her Ikoyi penthouse, called her mother, and reminded her to take her blood pressure medication that evening. She had won the quietest war in Lagos in a generation, and she had done it without raising her voice once. 3 months later, in a small courtroom in Abuja, the case was settled out of court. The terms were confidential, but according to 2 senior legal sources familiar with the agreement, the Okeke family agreed to pay Chidinma Okonkwo a one-time settlement of $109 million, plus a perpetual royalty agreement for ongoing use of the patented methodology. The settlement was deposited into a private account in her name. No press release was issued. No public celebration was held. And David Adesanya, the man who once believed he had discarded a tailor, did not call her, did not write to her, did not try to apologize, did not try to explain. Because what could he have possibly said? That he was sorry? Sorry for what? For divesting himself, at 30, of the one woman in his entire life who had inherited an empire she did not yet understand she was about to inherit? Sorry for mistaking quiet for weakness? Sorry for assuming that the woman who cried in the back of a taxi on the night he walked out was not the same woman who would one day, with patience alone, dismantle the dynasty he had been so eager to climb into. There were no words for that, not in Yoruba, not in English, not in any language a man can use to apologize for misreading the size of a woman before she has finished growing. Somewhere, 6 months after the engagement that never happened, David Adesanya sat alone in the same 2-bedroom flat in Lekki that he had once lived in before the marriage to Chidi. His Amex had been cancelled, his Patek Philippe had been quietly returned to Amara. His investors had not returned a single call in 91 days. And his mother, the same woman who had warned him at the beginning, a woman who knows how to build with her hands will one day build something you cannot take from her, looked at her son across the kitchen table and said nothing. Because what was there to say? She had told him. He had not listened. And somewhere across Lagos, in a duplex penthouse in Ikoyi, overlooking the same harbor he had once driven past in taxis he could not yet afford, Chidinma Okonkwo sat at a long mahogany desk, signing letters to her board, drafting plans for the opening of Ade Okafor Couture's newest boutique in Milan, and pausing, just once, to look out the window at the view she had bought not with anyone's money, but with her own hands, her mother's hands, and her grandmother's hands. 6 generations of women who had never raised their voices and had never needed to. Because they had understood what David Adesanya had never learned. That real power, the kind that lasts longer than applause, longer than red carpets, longer than the loud laughter of men at dinner tables who believe they have escaped something they had not yet understood. Real power is silent. It is patient. And one day, when the loudest man in the room finally hears it, he will realize, with the quiet shock of a man who has just been told the truth he spent 7 years refusing to learn, that he did not divorce a tailor. He divorced an empire. And the empire had not needed him to notice. It had only needed the silence to finish growing.